And I'm here today talking to my dear colleague and friend, Noah Michelson. Hi, Noah.
Hi, Hillary.
And we are going to talk about D is for Desire, HuffPost's new podcast about sex, love, relationships, intimacy, everything in between, that is hosted by Noah. Some of you guys may have been with Noah and myself before. This is our third event during quarantine, coronavirus, pandemic, over Zoom, this whole situation. So if you're with us again, we're very happy to have you back. And if it's your first time with us, we hope that you enjoy it and come back again. So just quickly, if you haven't listened to D is for Desire, which we're going to dig into, I want to say upfront, you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Acast. So it's everywhere where you find your podcasts. And we hope that you will check it out if you haven't already. So right before we dive in, I just want to go over a few instructions if you haven't been here before. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you feel comfortable, please turn on your video so we can see your face. We would love that. And we also want to hear from you. We have over 200 pre-submitted questions for Noah today, but we really want to hear from you live. So after we have our conversation here at the top, we will open it up for a Q&A with folks here. So what you will need to do is you'll need to raise your hand to ask a question. And you can do that by clicking participants. You will see at the bottom of your screen, and then you'll see a panel open up on the right with the raise hand option. If you're on a mobile device, click the more button at the bottom right and select raise hand. We'll do our best to get to your question, and when it's your turn, I'll call you up. I'm going to be totally the master, DJ control room person here today. So I will call you up, I will unmute you, and I will invite you to ask your question. If you have other questions, there are a few people who are, I think, also available to ask questions of. You can ping me or another co-host of this event. And then lastly, if you would like to support our journalism, please think about joining HuffPost membership. You'll get access to our comments section where you can talk with other people who love HuffPost and share your feelings about our journalism. You'll get invitations to virtual events like this one and more. So all you need to do is go to huffpost.com/subscribe. So please do that. So without further ado, let's get going. I will go over those instructions about how to raise your hand again when we get to the Q&A portion. But for now, I've got some questions for Noah. So Noah, if a stranger was going to ask you to describe D is for Desire, how would you explain this project?
That's a really good question. So about 3 years ago, I did another podcast for HuffPost called HuffPost Love and Sex. And we did like 100 episodes or 50 episodes. And it was a similar kind of podcast where we were looking at all these different topics around sex and love. But I'm super interested in topics that people don't normally talk about, right? So kink. So what is it like when you love having period sex? What is it like when you've had sex with 10,000 people? I wanted to track down these people who have these lives that are actually very different than mine. I have a pretty vanilla sex life, and I think people sometimes don't believe that because I'm so interested in this. I've been reading and writing and talking about sex for about 10 years now professionally, but I've always been interested in sex. And I think a lot of people, most people, have questions about sex, and we don't ever really talk about it. So I really wanted to make a podcast where nothing was off the table, nothing was taboo. And at the same time, we're not going to judge people for how they feel. Maybe what you are into is not what I'm into, but let's talk about it because chances are maybe I have something I'm into that you're not into. So if we all can kind of shed all this shame and all the taboos that we have in our society, and that it's 2020 and we're still so repressed and sex is still such a scary thing for so many people, even though we're all doing it or we're thinking about it or we're looking at porn or, it's a huge part of our lives. Even if you look at Hollywood, if you look at magazines, sex is in everything. So we should talk about it and we should be honest about it. And it shouldn't be something that's scary.
Totally. And I don't want to like get too like in the background of this, but we've been talking about trying to get this podcast off the ground at HuffPost for a long time. And we'd sort of get going and then pull back. And how has it been? Like, what's your process? Just pulling together an episode or coming up with the ideas? Where have they come from? And we'll talk more in depth about some of these during our conversation. But
Yeah.
where do you find your ideas for where you want to go?
So to start, I just have to talk about our team, which includes Nick Offenberg, Sarah Patterson, and Becca Di Gregorio, and they are my production team and they're producers. And so I couldn't do any of this without them. They actually do a lot of the heavy lifting because I'm also the editorial director of HuffPost Personal. So I have a job that already takes up a ton of my time. So getting to do this, it's tricky, right? But what we do is we have meetings and I read a lot. I read, gossip columns, all kinds of things. Stories can come from anywhere. So I don't know if you know the director, Joel Schumacher. He directed like Batman and Robin and a bunch of those films. A couple months ago, it came out that he had had sex with 20,000 people, which just blows my mind. Like, how do you even find the time? So I literally just put out a call on my own personal, Twitter, Facebook, and I said, have you had sex with over 1,000 people? I would love to talk to you. And I actually know this person, Mark S. King. He's a journalist and he's a writer and an activist. And he wrote me and he told me that he had had sex with close to 10,000 people. And I said, well, will you come on the podcast? So you find people everywhere, you find stories everywhere. And then the team and I, we get together and we do the interview and then we write a script and then we do voiceover. All of it's had to be done, via Zoom and via all these different things. I set up a podcast station in my kitchen now where I record with a microphone because we can't be together anymore. So it's all kind of piecemeal and weird. And if you listen to the podcast, maybe, one section's a little echoey because I screwed something up. But we make it happen and it's exciting. I would say this is one of the most gratifying parts of my job is creating something and being able to share other people's stories and put them out into the world. I love it.
And that the episode you referenced with your friend, the journalist who's had sex with 10,000 people, is dropping tomorrow. Is that correct?
Tomorrow. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a wild ride. It's incredible. It's very emotional too, because he got AIDS in the 80s. And we talk about what it was like and burying most of his friends, but also still having a very voracious sex life while he was infected. It went all these places that I didn't think it would go. And that's why I also love this podcast because I'm learning a lot too. I'm discovering all these things that I didn't know about at the same time as the listeners are.
So yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more. I think if you're just sort of coming to Dias for Desire, maybe you're not always following HuffPost Personal or Noah, you personally, you might find some of the subject matter a little weird or extreme or just like something that had never crossed your mind before, kind of like, what is this real? So we're talking about sex magic, sex witches, erotic cake sitting, which if you haven't read about it on HuffPost or listen to the episode is exactly what it sounds like. You referenced period sex, but when you listen to the podcast, there's so many familiar ideas to connect to around intimacy and shame and acceptance and connection. And so what for you, like what are the things that you hope listeners are walking away from listening with?
Yeah. When I did the last podcast before Dias for Desire, the number one thing that we would hear from listeners was, am I normal? Is this thing that I like to do or that turns me on, is that normal? And so that's sort of the mindset that I had when I started this one too, because actually nothing we do is normal, which means everything we do is normal, right? So that's what I really want people to walk away from the podcast with is that there are people out there. They are your neighbors, they are your brothers, they are your parents, they're your coworkers, and they probably aren't telling you about these things that they like to do or that they wish they could do, but they have these desires too. And I really wanted to call it Dias for Desire because it's about desire, and desire can mean so many things. It can mean sex, right? But it could also just mean how you want to live your life. I mean, one of the episodes is about a woman named Josie, and she's 46 years old, and she's aromantic, which means she doesn't experience romantic attraction at all. So she didn't realize that till she was 42. Imagine going your entire life and feeling like there's something wrong with you because you don't want to go on dates. You're not interested in romance. Having that perspective out in the world, that blew my mind. And I think a lot of people who listen to it think, I didn't even know that I had a romantic orientation. I knew I had a sexual orientation. I knew I had a gender identity, but I didn't know that I also had this third component about who I was romantically attracted to. And maybe it's nobody. But she still has desires, right? She still has things that she wants. So I really want people to just listen to it with an open mind and say, how is this person like me? How is this person nothing like me? And what can I learn from this? What can I take away from this? And how will it change the way I see myself and also the world?
One thing in the episode with Josie that I've thought a lot about afterwards was that sort of decoupling of being romantic with sexual desire, other kind of desires. You can then attach being romantic to friendships and other relationships you have. And it actually, this is so random, but it actually made me think about like Herman Melville and Nathaniel Hawthorne and some of these sort of storied, very romantic friendships that have existed through time and literature and, you know, in different things that we've seen, but that we've all wanted so badly to cast you know, a sexual frame on. And, you know, even though I wrote my senior thesis on Nathaniel Hawthorne, I actually can't remember like what the full deal was with Hawthorne and Melville. So we don't need to go deeply into that. But it made me think about, you know, some of my very close friendships where I have, you know, a real desire to take care of someone, or it's like, it's just like a level above, and it is kind of romantic because it's that kind of attachment. And so I really felt like that episode, even though I didn't identify with Josie, the things that she was talking about really did resonate in a very surprising way for me.
And that's what I try and do at the end of the episode, is sort of pull back and give some perspective, right? And so that's what I said at the end of that episode, and people can go listen to it, and they should. But I said, you know, what if we stop spending all of our time looking for the one, this one person who's going to be our sexual partner, our romantic partner, our life partner? You know, my best friend Sarah is in some ways my soulmate. I'm not going to ever have sex with her. We're not going to get married. I don't think about her romantically, but she provides the things in my life that even when I have a boyfriend, there are still things that she gives me that he's not going to give me. And so I like to think about that. And Josie's story made me think about my relationships, all of them, in a new way. And that was exciting.
Yeah, it's really cool. Well, like I said, we had almost 200 pre-submitted questions. So I'm going to give one to you now.
Okay,
so this was a question from JJ Hoyt. And the question is, when is it appropriate to bring up kinky sex in a brand new relationship?
This is a great question. And let me start by saying, number one, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. And everything I say you should take with a grain or a silo of salt. But I will give you my opinion because I have spent a lot of time thinking about this stuff and talking to people. There isn't a, you know, one size fits all answer to this question. What's right for you, first of all, is not going to be right for the next person or the person after that. I think what I can tell you is that talking about it, as soon as you feel comfortable, is going to make that relationship so much better. Because if you have a certain kink that really fulfills you and really gets you off, and you're spending all this time not fulfilling that with a partner because you're afraid to tell them, probably having not great sex. You're probably not, you know, enjoying this time that you're with someone. And people like to say, you know, oh, sex is like pizza. Even the worst sex is still pretty good. That's not always true. And I think a lot of us can have sex that's really unfulfilling, especially a lot of women can end up having sex that's unfulfilling because women don't orgasm in the same ways that men do. It can be a lot harder to get there, especially if you don't have the intimacy. And again, I'm generalizing. This is not true for all women. Some women can orgasm at the drop of a hat. I know that. But I think the sooner you can have that conversation, you know, maybe you don't want to have it the first time you're intimate with someone, but maybe you want to lean into that the next time. And I also think maybe it's a good idea to not have that conversation when you're in bed with them or you're in the dungeon with them or wherever you are. Maybe you bring that up over dinner, and you say, I would love to talk to you about what really turns me on. Number one, that's probably going to be exciting that you're talking about this stuff in a setting that's not specifically about having sex. Like that's, I think, titillating too. But number two, it removes some of the pressure because if you ambush someone, you're in bed and you're like, I really need you to do this, or I really want to do that, and they aren't maybe comfortable with it or they hadn't even thought about it, that can be some high pressure and that can make things rough too. So I think do it outside of the bedroom first, do it as soon as you feel comfortable with this person, and really be honest, really have that conversation and say, this is what really does it for me. How can we make this work? Will this do it for you? And if not, is there something I can do for you? And can we, meet in the middle or take turns or trade off and on? So a lot there, but I hope this person goes for it.
That's such good advice. I mean, I think generally just that idea of taking these conversations into a different context is so brilliant, because then it also doesn't seem reactive or critical, right? It's like, whether it's before or after, you don't want somebody to feel like you're doing a, like a review of what went wrong.
Exactly.
And, so that's really good advice. Thanks,
Cool.
Noah. Let's talk about some of these episodes in a little more detail. Obviously, Lindsay, our cake sitter, she is fascinating. And I think so far, that's probably my favorite episode. It's so many things to think about in terms of who she is and her performance and what she does, what it means to her and means to her fans. How did you find Lindsay? And just talk a little bit about, for folks who haven't listened to the episode or read about her, what she does.
Yeah. So Lindsay Dye is an erotic cake sitter. So she is a cam girl and people can watch her in her cam. And she will bake a cake and then she will erotically sit on it.
She'll bake a 7-layer cake.
She will bake these crazy, amazing cakes. And what happens is you're in a chat room and you're watching her do it and you tip her with these tokens that you buy. And every token is 5 cents. And so she'll say, all right, I will crack this egg if I get 6 tokens. So someone will pay her 30 cents or 25 cents to crack that egg. And so she is building up. She's trying to make $200 a session maybe. And she has all these little things that'll add up to it. And once she hits $200, then she'll sit on that cake that she's baked and you've watched her decorate. And she does it wearing lingerie and it's very erotic. And she'll do other things, she'll masturbate. She'll do things that typical cam girls do. But she has this very much an artist sort of component to what she's doing. I met her because our deputy editor, Emily McCombs, she interviewed her the year before. She's friends with her. And I thought that would make a great podcast. I didn't know much about Lindsay, and she came in and she blew my mind because she is truly an artist and she's a sex worker. And she doesn't think one is better than the other, right? She's not saying, oh, I'm just doing this so I can make art. Or she's not saying, I'm just doing this so I can have sex. She's saying, these are 2 parts of my life and they come together and they both fulfill me. And so she'll do this online, but she'll also go to art galleries and different parties and she'll perform in person. And she'll sing these really sad R&B love songs while she's sitting on the cake. And what happens is you're sort of confounded by what you're seeing and what you're hearing and what you're smelling. You can smell the butter and the sugar when you're in the same room with her. She told me that people start crying sometimes because there's such an emotional overload and all the different sort of reactors are firing in ways that people aren't used to. And so hearing about her life and hearing about just having someone say, I'm not ashamed of this. I make a good living doing this. She had a job where she worked 40 hours a week in an office and she got sexually harassed. And so she said, if I'm going to be sexually harassed, I'm going to get paid to do it. I'm going to know the men who are doing it. I'm going to forge relationships. She does it every single day. She knows a lot of the same people. They come in. People will tip her just for when the J train goes by her window or just when her cat comes into view. It's not always sexual. And so I love this episode because it draws back the curtain on this one sex worker's life, this one artist's life. And it changed the way that I saw what she was doing. It's not just this silly thing where she's, smushing a cake with her ass. It's it's powerful and it's
Mhm.
meaningful. And it changed the way I thought about her, but also just the way I thought about sex work and the way I thought about art. It's really beautiful. And she's also a great speaker, and she really knows herself and really knows her art. So when you listen to the episode, she made my job really easy because I just wanted to hear her talk. So that might be my favorite episode so far too, actually.
I also thought it was really interesting what she was talking about in terms of safety,
Mm,
and how while she loves performing live, actually this sort of mediated experience through the screen, how it's not just safe for her, but it's very safe for her clients and her fans, and however you describe them, her participants, um, and how important that was for her in terms of creating an intimate relationship, and actually also how she sort of sees it as offering a deeper, more fulfilling experience with pornography than so many people are getting from like, clip sites or whatever, wherever they're going for like a sort of fast fix. And that there are these people out there sort of really trying, not like just just staring right in the face why people are there, and seeing that as part of the fulfillment of their work, and creating a safe space for people to experience different kinds of pleasure and relationships that they may not be having in other places.
right. I mean, I think the internet is both the most wonderful thing in the world and the worst thing in the world, right? It can disconnect us. Um, and porn is the same thing. I think we can look at porn and we can objectify people, and we can be removed from what we're really looking at. But Lindsay made a great point, and you're making a great point too, in that actually it can bring us together. And when you are able to forge these kind of relationships with people and actually find intimacy, it can happen over a screen.
Mm-hmm.
And you can feel like you know someone, and maybe you can actually get to know them, not in the same way you would in the physical world. But that doesn't mean that we have to put a value judgment on that and say, this relationship is not as important as this relationship just because it's happening over a screen. And I liked what she said too. Yeah, it can take people, she said, a year before they will show themselves to her. And once they do, it's because they feel comfortable and they feel seen. And that's really important too. So I love thinking about it in that way too.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Sex Witches episode too.
Yeah.
Um, so tell me about the origin of that episode as well.
Yeah. I mean, I love witches. And I personally dabble in witchcraft a little bit too. And again, I think when people hear witchcraft, they think, blood orgies and worshiping Satan. That's not what it is in 2020 anymore. It's really about just having an intention, something you want, and using your energy, whether, people use vision boards, there's the whole idea of like the law of attraction. It's really about visualizing what you want and finding a way to put your energy into the world and getting it. So these women that I found, they're sex witches. So the energy they think is most potent is the energy that you create when you have sex. So when you orgasm or when you're masturbating. So what they do is they make an intention, they think of a thing they want. And it's not like, oh, I really want a new Porsche, right? They're not trying to manifest winning the mega million. So that's what I sometimes try and manifest. But they're thinking about things, smaller things about maybe feeling more fulfilled in their job, finding ways to bring about a healthier relationship with someone. These things that are actually possible. And then they are setting that intention, and then they are using sex, whether alone or with other people, to raise this energy. And when they're raising the energy, they're thinking about that thing they want, and they say that it manifests. um, Not only that, they're helping other people deal with trauma through sex magic. So one of the witches, her name is Jamie Lee. She's in Nashville. She was raised in an evangelical church, which I think for a lot of people is a devastating way to be raised, especially if you're a woman. And so she had to unlearn all these things that she had learned about her body, about sex, and now she helps other people do that too. And she, talks about how really part of that spell or that magic for those people is actually having a conversation with your body, something we don't ever do. She encourages people to actually refer to their bodies as he, she, or they, whatever pronoun fits, instead of thinking of their body as an it. Start to think of it as an actual person, you, and have a conversation with it. So a lot of it's about shifting mindsets. And so I think it's not as quite as woo woo as people think. And that's another thing I loved about that episode, is that it's actually a lot more grounded in the reality of our world than, you know, voodoo dolls or riding broomsticks or things like that. Things that are representational and that maybe are still important to some people who do practice magic, because it's another way to think about their intention. But, you know, I just have always loved witches. I love The Craft. It's one of my favorite movies, you know, and I just think this idea that magic exists and that we can harness it and that we can harness it through sex, that blew my mind. So I was like, let me find some sex witches, and there's a lot of them out there, and let me just talk to them. Sometimes the podcast, to be honest with you, it's really selfish, where it's just me and I'm like, I'm really interested in this. I want to talk to these people. Luckily, a lot of times the things that I'm interested in, other people are interested in too, and they either just haven't admitted it or they just wouldn't say it out loud. And so I think they're able, we're providing a place for people to go and think about these things. I'll also say some people hate the podcast. I have so many 1-star reviews on the podcast, and I think it's because there's a lot of what we're talking about is still scary, like I said earlier, and we're still told, don't talk about this. This is filthy. This is shameful. This is not something you should be doing. If you're going to have sex, you have it with one partner that you're married to in missionary position, and you know, maybe the guy has an orgasm and then you're done. Like that doesn't have to be what sex is anymore, and that's not what desire is. But I know that that's still very threatening, and I get that. And I hope that conversations like this, I hope the podcast, I hope this is like disrupting that, and that can sort of explode that sort of thinking. Even if 5 people at the end of this first season have thought differently about something. And I'm getting emails from people who are saying, I got an email from someone the other day about the aromantic episode, and they said, this is me. I never knew that. I didn't even know this existed. I've spent my whole life thinking I'm broken because no one has ever talked about this. And I stumbled on this podcast, and that's me. Like, how revolutionary is that? That's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll move on from the sex witches in a minute. But one thing I really was struck by the sort of healing aspect of the work, though there is also a part that involves connecting sexually with a tree. So it did go to some interesting places, but I also sort of left thinking that, you know, someone might listen to the podcast and think, you know, maybe this is something I should consider for my own health and well-being, and sort of like, it's very goal-oriented, some of the work that they do. So I found that really interesting. But yeah, it was mostly not broomsticks and cauldrons, but
Yeah.
but a different kind of like inherent magic.
Yeah, and the other thing too, and you know, to sort of dovetail on what you're saying, I think for all the episodes, the idea that I want people to take away is like, this is a sexy choose your own adventure. You decide how much of this you want to, one, believe or make part of your life or reject. Like, you don't, you know, if parts of the sex witch episode make sense to you, explore those parts. If you don't think that you want to or can connect with a tree, don't connect with a tree. No one's going to make you. You know what I mean? I don't think I'm going to connect with the tree. Anything could happen, but that doesn't seem like something that's on my horizon. And, you know, but that doesn't mean I can't take other things from that episode. So that's what I want everyone. Again, you know, we have an episode about period sex coming up soon. If you don't want to have period sex, don't have period sex. But what I want you to think about is, why don't you want to have period sex? Is that a choice that you made? Or is that something that you've been told by our culture that is dirty or wrong or disgusting? And even if you consider that for 3 minutes after you listen to that episode, and then you go back to saying period sex is gross, cool. But at least maybe you grappled with that a little bit, and maybe your mind, you know, creaks open just a little tiny bit.
Yep. Let's take another question that we got before we
Yeah.
started this event. Actually, we had two questions that I'm going to mention from Crystal Campisi and Ricky Thompson. Both asked about non-monogamy and sort of how, what's happening in terms of non-monogamy. Is this, I mean, it's something you are on dating apps. I am not currently, but I can tell you that I have seen certainly many men, straight men, claiming to be in ethically non-monogamous relationships. I sometimes bring some skepticism to that, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it does seem like, and I hear this especially from younger people, even teens, who just think monogamy is this, structure that was created and that we should all be breaking it down. So out there, what are you hearing, and what are people sort of doing that's different?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was actually on Hinge this morning. Someone sent me a message, and his profile said, "Don't contact me if you aren't interested in open or polyamorous relationships." That is a new thing. That is not something that even 5 years ago people would be so open about saying or demanding. Because when we think about monogamy, right, we think about the family structure that has existed for so long, and some people still want to exist, where we have a mother and a father and we have children, and that happened because you needed people to work the land, and it's centuries old, and it made sense because I don't know if people know this, but even before, marriage was not a romantic proposition. Marriage happened because you needed people to form a unit that would work your farmland, and it made sense. And so if you ended up liking the person that you got married to, that was great, but that's not why you did it. So romantic marriage is a fairly new thing. Even newer is this idea that we don't need to just be with one person, that we could actually be with many people. And whether that's an open relationship where you do have one primary partner, but you're both experiencing sex with other people, or you're in a polyamorous situation, which means you're actually in loving, fulfilling relationships with many people. And maybe your partners are also in those relationships. Maybe they branch off in different ways. Maybe they make a cobweb. There's so many different ways to do it. So we're seeing that now. And I think the most exciting thing is just that people are now talking about this. We had a piece on HuffPost Personal actually about a woman who her husband's girlfriend joined their family, and now they're best friends. They don't have sex together, but they have a relationship that's very intimate. So I think the first step in wrapping your mind around it is sort of like unlearning all the things that we learned about how monogamy is the only way to do it, right? Once you start to back away from monogamy and say, well, why is this the way that we've been taught to do it? And what happens when I stop prioritizing that? And you let your desire, right? That word again, desire, sort of dictate what you want. It's hard because we still live in a society that wants people to be monogamous. We still grow up and we're told that one day our prince will come along or our princess will come along. That's going to be the person you're going to be with. And if you're lucky, you'll have that 50th wedding anniversary coming up. And so being able to move away from that is difficult, but it's not impossible. And again, the same thing I said about the kinky conversation that we said earlier, it's about being upfront and honest about what you're looking for. So I love the guy on Hinge this morning who said that he wants to be in an open relationship. Why should I go down this road with him and then find out 8 dates in that he wants to be open and I don't? So the more that people are upfront and the more willing they are to explore it, I think the better it is. I also want to say, if you want to be monogamous, that's not bad either. It's not like we're trying to destroy monogamy. Some people find that they really find the most stability, the most excitement, in the healthiest way for them to be in the world is to be with one other person. And I think that's fine too. I just think you shouldn't default to that because you've been told that's what you should do. I think you should really have some long, hard conversations with yourself where you're saying, why do I want this? What do I really want? And how do I find the people to do it? Once you start having open relationships, then you also have to think about how do I keep this open and honest and healthy there too. There's this thing called jealousy. It's very hard to see someone you love go out the door because they're going to go have sex with someone else. I think that it takes a lot of work and a lot of honesty to get to a place where you can do that. But there's also something called compersion, which is when you see someone that you love getting fulfillment or enjoyment, and you're able to take enjoyment in that. So I think being able to move from jealousy to compersion and being able to really take joy in seeing your partner take joy, that seems like a goal, definitely. I've never
Yeah.
been in an open relationship. I think I would like to try it, but it scares me. It definitely scares me.
Well, right, because it's also there are just so many expectations that
Yeah,
have to be sort of deconstructed, and then kind of new kinds of relationships
yeah.
built, right? It would be a lot of work if that wasn't how you started out in the world. You
Right.
know?
And if you don't have a lot of examples or idols or conversations already happening, you're sort of going at it in the dark, right? And you're just groping your way through it. And you're going to have a lot of disappointments, I think. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try it. But again, the more conversations we have about this, the more we're able to talk about it, the less scary it is, the easier it's going to be for everyone to do exactly what they want to do.
Yep. So we're going to go to Q&A in a minute.
Yeah.
But I had one more question for you,
Mm.
which is just tell us. I mean, I think we talked about the Lindsay's cake sitting episode probably being both of our favorites. But what else is going to come along this season so that we know what we should be excited for?
Yeah. So I think my very favorite episode is the one that's coming out tomorrow, which is with the man who's had sex with 10,000 people, because it just that number is confounding for me. I've had a lot of sex in my life, but nowhere near that much sex. And to hear how it sort of dictated the things he did, the places he moved, um, and he grew up in the 60s in the South in a religious family. And so to think about that, um, and then he was seducing older men when he was like 14. So we had to have a really difficult conversation about that, because I said, in the 60s, maybe that was different. But when you hear that a 14-year-old is seducing older men in 2020, that's really problematic. So we talked about that. We talked about, what happened when everyone he knew was dying of AIDS. He said that if you had a guest room in West Hollywood in the 80s, there was almost it was almost guaranteed that someone was dying of AIDS in your guest room. That's how it was happening. Um, and then, to find out now he's married and in a monogamous relationship at the age of 60. So just the trajectory of where he started to where he is now. He cries at some points. We laugh at some points. It's one person's life in about 35 minutes, and it's a life that most of us will never live and maybe have never even thought existed. And to be able to sort of come across that and package that and then share that with people, I love that. And then the last episode, the period sex episode, where we talked to two people. This is actually the first. I read an article in New York Magazine about 7 years ago about people who have a fetish for period sex, and it blew my mind. And that's why I started the last podcast, because I was like, we should talk to these people. I never got to do it. So now I'm finally getting, it's like coming full circle in some ways. I'm finally getting to talk to these people. And, I talked to one guy named David, and he first had period sex when he was 15. It was an accident. He was going down on a woman, and she bled in his mouth. And he really liked it. And by the end of the episode, I learned that he doesn't just like period sex. He doesn't feel whole if he doesn't have it. Again, that is not my life. And it never will be, I don't think. But to meet someone who is so adamant about what their desire looks like and what they need to feel whole, and to have them talk about it with me so openly. I mean, this is going to sound corny, but like it feels like a gift. It feels like a gift to have people be that sort of unafraid in a world that is telling them that there. I know when we publish that podcast, I'm going to get so much mail from people who are going to say, this is disgusting. Why are you doing this? Why would you give someone this platform? And it's because they're not that different than we are. And maybe it's not period sex, maybe it's something else. Or maybe, you're going to find out one day your grandkid likes period sex. Or, you know what I mean? There's just so many ways that we're going to encounter things that don't make sense to us. And the more that we're open to it, I think the healthier and happier we're going to be. At the end of every episode, I say, it's not taboo if it turns you on. And I truly believe that. If it's something that feels good to you and it's not hurting anyone else and it's not hurting you unless you want to be hurt and everyone's consenting to it, then you should be able to do it. That's my bottom line. And I think we'd all be in a much better place if we stop trying to police each other, we stop trying to police ourselves based on these really outdated ideas about what's okay and what's not okay. And yeah.
Okay, so that's why everyone should listen to D is for Desire. Open your mind.
That's right.
Leave 5-star reviews.
Open your pants.
Yeah.
You know,
whatever you need to open.
That's right.
It's okay with us.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go to Q&A. We've got about 20 minutes. I would love to ask people who have questions to please keep your questions as to the point as you can, so that we can talk to as many people as possible today. Just a reminder, you go to participants and click raise hand. I'll unmute you. If I need help, I'll call for an SOS from one of my co-hosts here, and I will call you up to ask a question. I know we have a question to kick us off from SEK. Essie, if you could raise your hand, I would love to call on you. I'm looking, if you hear me, then I can unmute you.
And also, I'll just say really quick while you're looking, Hillary, I want to remind people, I am not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I will do my best. If I can't answer your question, I'll just tell you. And, you know, I'll maybe send you somewhere else to find that information. So let's just see what happens. There's no judgment. There's no shame. Let's see where we go.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to unmute Essie. There we go. Essie, can we hear you?
I don't know. Can you?
We can. Okay, we can see you too.
Okay. Oh no. Anyway, thank you so much for addressing my question. I appreciate it. So much of what you've been saying has resonated with, like, oh yeah, that sounds familiar. That sounds familiar. That sounds familiar. But I'm now in a very new situation where I'm with a wonderful person who is remaining celibate for spiritual reasons. And because of my more varied past than his, I'm having a tough time figuring out exactly how to be intimate and romantic and caring without going overboard into that sexual area. And suggestions would be appreciated.
Yeah. Let me start by asking, when you say that this person is being celibate, how celibate are we being? Does that mean no intercourse? Does that mean no sexual activity at all?
It's fine for him to pleasure me, but only with his hands, nothing other than that.
Yep.
But he has, I don't know if you want to say like taken a vow necessarily, to not be on the receiving end and to not even do something like masturbate or anything like that.
And so is this unfulfilling for you because of that? I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around what would be ideal for you. Are you worried about his feelings, or are you worried about not being fulfilled yourself? Where is sort of the friction happening right now in the way that your relationship is set up?
The difficulty for me is in making sure that he's getting what he wants out of the relationship, because when I ask him, it's always like, I'm fine. Like, really? Are you?
Yeah. So this is when I would say you guys should have one of those dinner chats that I was talking about earlier, when someone asks, how do we address a kink? And sort of this is like the inverse of that, right? How do we address not a kink, almost the exact opposite? And I would just be really straight up with him and you know, make a delicious dinner, or if he makes dinner, have him make a delicious dinner, and make it kind of romantic and say, you know, I would just love to chat about what's been going on with us. I really want to be honest about this. I want to make sure that you're feeling good about what's happening here, because I enjoy what we do, but also this is new for me. This is not like anything I've ever experienced. And, you know, when we've talked about it in the past, I feel like maybe we haven't gotten all the way where we should get. And I want you to know that there are no judgments here. And I just really want to have a super honest conversation about what you want to get out of this. And hopefully he can be honest with you and tell you those things. I think, you have to think about, it's interesting when you think about, I think sometimes people think when they are talking about being fulfilled, it's just about getting the sexual pleasure they need. But a lot of times the thing that fulfills us, right? Yeah, the thing that fulfills us is actually seeing our partner fulfilled. And so if he tells you that he is fulfilled and the things that you guys are doing is actually bringing him pleasure, and it's also honoring this commitment that he's made for whatever reasons, at some point you have to believe him. You know what I mean? And you have to
no.
I know. You have to trust that he is being honest with you. If you get to a place where you find out that's not true, that's going to suck, right? But that'll probably mean other things about your relationship too. If he doesn't feel like he can be comfortable with you or honest with you about this thing, when you're being so open and honest with him, that's probably a red flag about other parts of your relationship too. So I guess that's my advice, is really just have that conversation. Don't make it scary. Don't make it sort of like this ultimatum in any way. Just say, I really love being in this relationship with you. I just want to check in and make sure that it really is as good for you as it is for me, and that you are getting everything you need. And is there anything else I could do that would make this better for you? And I think that would actually go a long way. And I also say to everyone who's watching, these check-in conversations are good things to have no matter what, even when you aren't experiencing a specific issue. Every couple months, having dinner together or watching that Netflix show you love to watch together and turning to each other and saying, let's check in. How are we doing? Are we both still happy to be in this relationship? What could we be doing better? I think that's really important. But good luck. That's exciting. And I hope it
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Essie. More hands raised. Anybody live questions?
Don't be afraid. I promise I don't bite, at least here.
Well, Noah, while we see if we get some raised hands, let me ask you another question that was submitted in advance.
Sure.
If you don't mind. All right. Oh, let's see. This is a really interesting question from Chuck Rocky.
Okay.
I love fantasy and notice that I have a desire for them to come true, but the fantasy is often pleasurable. Is that usual?
Right. So I think that he's saying basically he has these fantasies, but oftentimes the fantasy is more exciting than the reality of the fantasy, right? So I guess I have some bad news, Chuck, in that that's what fantasies are. Fantasies usually are better than the real thing because you get to set the parameters. You're able to imagine whatever you want to imagine. And a lot of times it's not going to live up to whatever's in your head because what's in your head isn't real, right? I think that being said, again, there are ways to make fantasies as good as they can be. And a lot of that is having these conversations with your partner. If you're having a fantasy about, let's say it's about anal sex, and then you get to have anal sex and it doesn't go the way you want, maybe then you sort of regroup and think, well, why wasn't this as good as it was? Is it because you weren't having it with this supermodel that you've been dreaming about? Or was it because maybe you hadn't prepared in the ways that you should have beforehand? So I think being able to understand why a fantasy doesn't get to that place that you wanted it to get, and then doing all the things that you can do that are in your control to help get it there are actually going to be, I think, can really make it even better. You have to be kind of realistic though, because again, it's a fantasy. And our fantasies operate outside of the realm of things we have control over. So.
Yes. Thank you, Noah. Thank you. Okay, we have a hand raised from Crystal, who we shared a question with from earlier. But Crystal, I'm gonna unmute you. I think we've talked to you before.
Hi.
Okay, there you are.
Well, I didn't have so much of a question, but I did want to bring it back around to consensual non-monogamy again and just share a couple of things, if that's okay.
Please, let's hear it.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
So we've been in consensual non-monogamy for about 12 years now. I've probably had sex with about 200 people while married. But I want to say that it's not scary. It doesn't have to be scary. We have a lot of jealousy problems. I'm a very jealous person. I don't want to watch my husband go off and leave me at home at night alone while he's having whatever with someone else. We don't do it that way. I just want to say that there's a lot of choices, and it's all about your guidelines and your boundaries with each other.
Yeah.
So what we do is we go to sex parties together, and we have whatever fun we're going to have at the sex party, and then we go home, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I don't go bowling with them. I don't go out to dinner with them. I don't make a date, leave my house to see someone else and leave my husband home. We don't do that. That would drive me insane.
Yeah.
So it's all about the guidelines and the boundaries. And I just wanted to put it out there that it doesn't have to be scary, and you can take it slow, and you can have, guidelines. Maybe we'll start with a threesome and we'll be together, or maybe we'll do it with another couple, but we'll be in the same room so we can look at each other and check in. And if it's not okay, you just put your little finger up and we stop.
Yeah.
Period. Done.
Yes.
All about guidelines and boundaries. And I just want to put two things out there for people that might be curious. Okay. There's a really great website called openlove101.com. It's a couple, and they have a lot of videos answering a lot of questions about stuff like this. If you're interested or curious about consensual non-monogamy, it doesn't have to be polyamory. It doesn't have to be relationships with other people. It can just be go to a party, have fun with other people, and come home with your husband. That's it. Done. And the other thing I wanted to mention is naughty events. They do the things like Naughty in New Orleans, where it's a convention. You can actually go to a sex convention in New Orleans next month in August. They're trying to have it. I don't know if they will or not. Where there's workshops, and there's entertainment, and there's playrooms where you can go and play in the playrooms. And there's rules in the playrooms. There's a couple playroom. There's a single playroom. There's a chocolate playroom, which has black men in it if you want to do that. It's not chocolate, but close. So I just want to put it out there that it's all about the guidelines and the boundaries that you set with your partner. And it doesn't have to be scary. And you can just put up your little finger and it's over if you're uncomfortable.
Yeah. Thank you for your question, for your comments, Crystal. I will follow up with that and say, you're absolutely right. It doesn't have to be the wild, wild west. You get to set the parameters. And like you said, for some people, I keep talking about being open and honest, right, with your partner. Some people who are in open relationships, they want their partner to go have sex with someone else and come home and not tell them a thing about it. They don't want to know. And that's just the way it is. If that works for you, that's great. I think you make your own rules and you get to decide. As long as both people or all of the people who are involved in your relationship are feeling, again, consensual and feeling like everything's okay, then you decide. I think you made a great point. Maybe going to a party with your partner or your partners is the way you want to do it, because then you're doing it together, or a threesome. But again, if it's not, if you want to have sex with other people and you don't want to know about it, some people that really works for them. So you get to decide. It's your own, sexy, choose your own adventure. And I say lean into it and try it if that is exciting for you. There's a lot of virtual sex parties that are happening right now where you could actually, have sex with your partner, or your partner is on cam, and watch other people doing it, because we can't really be in the same room with other people right now. Maybe that's a way to dip your toe into it. See how that feels to have other people watching you have sex, or to watch other people have sex. A lot of options. So yeah, thank you for that, Crystal. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Noah, as you know, we had a couple questions submitted in advance about blowjobs.
Yes.
Since you said you would answer them, I feel obligated to ask them of you.
Let's do it. Let's talk about blowjobs.
So, there were, really, they amount to, here is one. What are the best ways to help your partner learn how to give you the best blowjob? And then I think we also had a question on how to articulate to a blind, disabled woman how to give oral sex to a man. So coming at it from two different approaches, but wanted to share both of those.
And they're in some ways the same approach, I think. I think the idea, I think giving a blowjob can be scary or uncomfortable for some people, because you suddenly have this penis in your face and you're like, what do I do with it? A lot of men actually can't get off from just blowjobs. They really are only able to get off from penetration. or for masturbation. Blowjobs can be trickier. So I think it can be intimidating because you think, I don't know how to do this. Maybe I'm not going to do it right. There are teeth involved. There are all these kind of scary things that can happen with a blowjob, right? Bottom line, again, I sound like a broken record. It's about communication. So the person who's getting the blowjob needs to be letting the person know, oh, that feels good. That doesn't feel good. You're going too quickly. You're not going quickly enough. I'd love if you put your hand here. I mean, you don't want to turn it into this thing where it's like just dictating the entire time. But I think people need to be a little bit more vocal than they normally are. And I think we can maybe, porn is to blame for a lot of this. The first way that people encounter blowjobs a lot of times, I think, is through porn. That's not how blowjobs work a lot of times. And every penis is different, every mouth is different. And so I really think people should just talk about it and literally say, even if it feels uncomfortable, look up and say, does that feel good? Or look down and say, that doesn't feel good. I think it'd feel better if we tried this. Don't make it, like you said, like a job review. Don't make it about you're really bad at this or you can't get me off. Make it about how do you get this person off? And also, not everyone loves getting blowjobs. Not everyone loves giving blowjobs. And so also talk about that. Maybe your partner doesn't want to give you a blowjob. Why is that? Did you not take a shower beforehand? Is your penis too big? Does it hurt? So are there ways to actually minimize the pain or the aching in the jaw? There are so many reasons why a blowjob can go wrong. I think some people are afraid of being ejaculated on. So being communicative about that. If you're gonna come, let's give them a heads up, and so I think the more that people identify why they don't like blowjobs or why they feel bad at it, and the more that people can identify why they love blowjobs and what really is good for them, the better everyone involved is going to be.
Thank you, Noah.
Yeah.
We're just about out of time, but I did just want to ask you to talk for a minute about consent.
Yeah.
And how people should be thinking about getting consent, giving consent, what that conversation looks like too, if someone is, wants to sort of expand, what's already been consented to. Kind of how do you see the consent working in right now?
So Ashley Manta, who actually started this movement called Canisexuals, which is in combining cannabis and weed, and I interviewed her for the last week's episode. We talked a lot about consent, and she made some really great points in that. Again, it's having these conversations before you get to the bedroom and before things are happening, where you say to the person you're with, here are the things that I'm interested in, and maybe some of these things are a little scary, or I haven't done these before. So if I'm in trauma or if something's going wrong and maybe I can't even tell you, here's what it's going to look like. Here's what my face might look like. Here's what might happen with my body. Here's what I need you to do if it seems like I'm feeling trauma. Or even having the conversation of, this thing I want to do seems kind of scary to me. Can we try it? But the minute I say no, that means no. Just having that conversation is important. And I know people hear no means no, and I think people make fun of that sometimes too. That's still an important adage, and there's a lot of nuance to it. A lot of things can mean no. And I think having sex with people that you trust, I think having scary sex with people that you trust, so maybe that's trying a fantasy you've never tried, maybe that's trying BDSM or it's bondage or things like that, that can be move more towards a dangerous element, which is why some people really like it. Maybe you don't do that with the person that you just met at the party. Maybe you save those activities for the person that you really trust. And so I think there are a lot of ways to think about consent. And I think it can be everything from just saying, no is going to mean no, but I still would like to try this thing with you. Let's try anal sex. But if I say no to you, then we're done. Having that conversation, not in the bedroom, all the way to some of the things that people might think are a little bit more scary or a little more challenging. Oh, there's the kitty.
Sorry, my cat really wants to see you, Noah.
Zoom bombing, yeah. No, but I think that's a great question. And I think, again, I think if we boil down so much of what we talked about today, Hillary, it's having good sex and fulfilling our desires really comes down to being able to communicate what it is. I'm going to quote Madonna, which is such a like dangerous thing to do right now because she's in hot water for what she's been saying about the coronavirus. But she had a really great quote, and she said, oftentimes people don't get what they want because they don't say what they want. So if you have this desire that's buried inside of you and you really want to fulfill it, the only way to ever do that is by raising your hand and saying, this thing I think would really get me off. How can we do this? And how can we do it safely? How can we make sure that you're having a good time too? And can we try it?
Right. And that'll eventually, if people can also sort of get past their own shame or embarrassment, help open up some of these structures and like lead to new experiences that you're covering in Dias for Desire.
Yes. And the last thing I'm going to say is, number one, if you have an idea for an episode or you have thoughts about the podcast, you can email the team at desire@huffpost.com and let us know. Some episodes actually do come from people writing in and saying, this is my life. Would this be an episode? And I'm like, yeah, that's a great episode. Other thing, follow me on Twitter. My email is there. If you have more questions that you didn't want to say in front of a room full of strangers, I'm happy to take questions over email. It's my email again is in my bio on Twitter. But I love talking to people about this stuff. None of it phases me, and I'm happy to provide that for people. So get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what you think about the podcast. Hillary, thank you for doing this with me. I always love talking to you. We should do this again when the second season comes out. And lastly, I want to say thank you again to Nick Offenberg, Sarah Patterson, Becca DiGregorio, who is the production team, who is amazing. And none of this would be possible without them. So, yeah.
Thank you, Noah. And everybody listen to Dias for Desire. Just finally, before you go, please again consider becoming a HuffPost member. Basic membership gets you into the HuffPost community where you can comment on stories, you can comment on Noah's stories, you can participate in online forums and get personal invites to these events. And if you want to financially support the work we're doing, you can also do that. We love that. Journalism is critical to our democracy and our lives, and really we can always use more support. So go to huffpost.com/subscribe. That's a / not a / like I said earlier. And lastly, we would love to hear what you think about today's event. So we'll be sending out a survey, and we hope you come back to see me and Noah again soon. So thank you so much.
Bye.